What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Vinyl Den, your channel for record collecting by record collectors. I'm Nick. Today, I'm talking about how Spotify has sucked the soul out of music. There's a bunch of links down below. You got links for the Vinyl Den Facebook group, for the merch page, for the Spotify and Apple Music playlist that I put together every week, and the Patreon page. So make sure you check all that out. Like always, if you enjoyed the episode, make sure you give me a thumbs up, hit that subscribe button down below, and make sure you hit that notification bell so you're notified every time I release new episodes. So Spotify has now been around for almost 20 years. They were founded back in 2006. The service itself actually launched in 2008, though. And it's become the dominant force in music streaming services. It's got just shy of 700 million monthly subscribers, with about 300 million of those being paid subscriptions, with a revenue in 2024 of about $18 billion and a net income of about $1.3 billion. And just to be completely transparent, I've had a subscription to Spotify for a long time. It's probably 2011 or 2012 when I first signed up, and at times over the years I've had either a paid or a free membership. And as someone who's listened to music almost every day of my life since I was a little kid, I was immediately drawn into the idea of having pretty much every song I ever wanted to listen to at my fingertips. But as the years have gone on, I've started seeing more and more issues with Spotify, and really there's issues with all the streaming services out there. I just think Spotify is probably the most egregious of them. And everyone knows that Spotify is a huge entity in the music streaming industry, but I think some people don't really grasp how big Spotify really is. Spotify is the 47th most visited website in the world, with about a quarter of all of its traffic coming from the US. And as far as revenue sharing goes, Spotify pays about 70% of its revenue out to rights holders, which for the most part are labels, and then from there, the artists are getting paid from whatever their deal is with their label. And Spotify really kind of rose to fame by stepping into this void that was left by entities like Napster and LimeWire, who really helped kick off the whole digital download craze in the early 2000s. And then you had like Pandora and Rhapsody kind of step up, and they still weren't great services. So Spotify was able to step up and say, look, we're going to make an even better version of what those platforms were. And they quickly became the, dominant force in music streaming. And initially they were an avenue for artists to get at least some revenue from their music, because they weren't getting anything from those, from Napster or LimeWire or any of those other, torrent sites out there or illegal download sites. And then over the last almost 20 years, Spotify has largely become part of the bigger problem in the music industry. So even though Spotify does pay royalties to rights holders, comparing it to the other big ones out there, so the main four, or the big four streaming services, are Spotify, Apple Music, Tidal, and Amazon Music. So the data I have is from 2023. So Spotify pays out roughly 3/1000ths of a penny per stream. If you compare that to Tidal, who pays out the most, it's about 1/100th of a penny. Amazon Music is just a little bit better than Spotify at about 4/1000ths of a penny. And Apple Music pays out the second most at 8/1000ths of a penny. Which, if you just look at the numbers that way, it all sounds pretty close. But if you look at just a million streams, so if you are an artist and you have 1 million streams from all those services, for 1 million streams, you're going to make a little over $3,000 from Spotify. From Apple Music, you're going to make a little over $8,000. And from Tidal, you're going to make about $13,000 per 1 million streams. So going from $3,000 to $13,000, that's a big difference between those services. So Spotify is the largest music service out there, but they're only paying a quarter to half of what those other services are. But none of this is new. People have been complaining about not being paid by music services for years, and Spotify has long been known to be one of the worst at it. But when this was recently brought up to the CEO of Spotify, his response was basically, well, if artists want to make more money off their music, they need to just create more music more often. So while the CEO of Spotify has been raking in money hand over fist, he's cashed out $400 to $500 million worth of stocks over the last year and a half, a lot of musicians are making basically nothing off of the service, which is why if you want to go to a concert, you're going to pay $200 to $300 for a ticket when 15, 20 years ago, that was a fraction of that. But don't get me wrong, I'm all for businesses making money, but Spotify is robbing artists. And then when artists complain about being robbed by Spotify, they in turn blame the artist. But something that's kind of come to light more recently, I've seen this talked about a few times over the last probably 5 or 6 months, and this is kind of what I'm talking about when I'm saying that Spotify is sucking the soul out of music, is all of this AI created music that's being flooded onto Spotify and being passed off as human created content. Because if there's no real band or no real label that they have to pay royalties to, Spotify gets to keep an even bigger chunk of that pie. Now, I don't think Spotify itself is actually creating this AI content, but Spotify over the years has been known for kicking off smaller musicians, smaller bands, when they say they violate the user agreement, but they turn a blind eye when you have all this obvious AI created music being put on Spotify every single day. I read, within the last couple of days that they estimate that there's 10,000 AI created songs uploaded every single day. And the end result of this is it's making it harder for smaller bands, for newer bands, to break into the algorithm on Spotify. Because Spotify, through their algorithm, is pushing more of this AI created content into playlists. I'm sure you've listened to some of the AI music out there. It's absolute garbage. So whenever people talk about music today being watered down and being terrible, it's things like all this AI created music that's making it harder to find good quality music. They're basically watering down their product just to make a bigger profit. And I'm somebody that's been on the record for a very long time as saying that there's good music being released every single week, all the time. It's just so hard to find it because it's buried in the absolute mountain of garbage that's out there. And that's another thing that's kind of wrong with all this streaming, how easy it is to stream music. It's another thing that the CEO of Spotify said not too long ago was it's a great time for the music industry because it's so easy and cheap to put out music, which I don't always see as such a good thing. You're flooding the music industry with music that, 15, 20, 25 years ago, you would never heard of before. Because having more music in the market doesn't mean you're going to get a higher quality. Typically, it's the complete opposite. The more music you throw out there, the more junk there is, and the harder it is to find good stuff. Especially when we no longer have radio stations that push music out to listeners because most people don't even listen to the radio anymore. And don't take this as me being somebody just hating on AI, because I was actually an early adopter to AI, and I've used it quite a bit over the last several years, but I'm somebody that really believes that AI has no place in music, at least as being a creator of music. AI could be a tool used. The Beatles used it when they released their new single a year or two back. They used it to kind of help clean up the old tapes to create a new product. I'm okay with them using it as a tool, but as somebody just creating music using AI, I'm just not there for it. One of the things that makes music so great is having that human element, that emotional connection. And that's something that AI just cannot create. And I even just saw recently that there's labels out there that are actually signing some of these AI artists who are creating, I would say over 95% of what they create is absolute garbage. And maybe 2 or 3% of it is actually somewhat passable, even though it's still never going to equate to anything that is made by a human. I've seen several artists over the last few years bring up the fact that their page on Spotify is being flooded by AI content that they didn't put on there, because you can just go onto Spotify and upload music to anyone's profile, and then when artists realize what's going on and they bring this up to Spotify, it's taking literally weeks and weeks to get this fake music pulled down off their page. Another thing that's kind of popped up with Spotify recently is the fact that some artists are starting to pull their music down off their service. I think King Gizzard and Lizard Wizard was the biggest of the musicians that announced they're taking their music down due to Spotify CEO's heavy investment into military technology, especially AI military tech. And from the reports I've read, it sounds like he's more interested in this military technology than anything music related. Because, going back to what I was saying earlier, it seems like, this is just all about making money. It has nothing to do with caring anything about music. He's not doing this for the sake of the artist. He's doing this as a money-making venture. I get it. That's what a lot of big companies do. But if you go back to his early statements, when Spotify was really getting big in the beginning, it was all about music. It was all about caring about the music and doing something for the music industry as a whole. And now that's completely gone, it seems like. So over the last 16 plus years, Spotify has been largely responsible for this hollowing out of music, of stealing the soul of music and making it this disposable background item. Because in large ways, people today have lost connection to the music that they listen to. It's now become something that's just on in the background, and there's not that really strong emotional connection. Sure, there is probably to the stuff they listened to, when they were a kid or in their teens and early 20s, but the stuff that's come out since then, there's just no connection to it because it's just a plastic disposable item. So unfortunately, I think there's really only one solution to this problem. It's something that's not going to happen overnight. It's going to take literally years and probably decades to happen, if and ever it does happen. And that's completely getting away from having any music streaming services. Sure, it's nice to pay 10 or 12 or 15 bucks a month to listen to anything you all listen to, but this model has completely killed the music industry and completely ruined musicians. And I get it. There's a lot of people out there that are going to say, hey, look, people don't make music to become rich and famous. They make music because they love making music. And yes, that is true. That is part of the plan, but it's nice to be able to live off the music you create. So if you're somebody that's ever complained about music being shit today, Spotify is a big reason why. And it's great to see that the conversation around having a livable wage for musicians has started over the last several months. It's been going on since earlier this year, but we're nowhere close to having that be a reality. And there's far too many musicians who are making basically nothing or literally nothing off the music they create. And it's kind of interesting if you look at this issue as the big picture and look at the fact that, yes, companies should be able to make money and have a profit and turn a profit and live off of that profit. But musicians should still have that same right when they're the ones that are creating the art. And turning music into this disposable, almost worthless product is completely destroying musicians. And yes, the music industry has been exploiting musicians since the beginning of recorded music, but artists have always been able to rely on album sales to help support themselves. And now Spotify is exploiting the labels, who are in turn still exploiting musicians. So ultimately, I think the only way to save the music and to improve the overall quality of the music industry is to move away from the streaming model. I understand it's going to be something that's going to be very hard to do, to get away from, because it's really easy if you pay your monthly subscription to pick up your phone and just click on any song you want to listen to. It's just the ease and convenience of it. But to know that is ruining music, it's destroying the music industry, it's crippling artists. I think it's time to look at the bigger picture and to move away from streaming. And like I said, I know it's something that's not going to happen overnight. It's something that's going to take years and years to happen, decades to happen, because it's taken us decades to get where we are now. So it's going to take equally as long to get back to what we were before. But I think it's something we can do, and it's something we need to do. But that's all I got for you today, guys. Thanks for checking the show out. Make sure you drop me a comment down below. Let me know what you guys think of this. I know streaming is going to be hard to move away from. It's an addiction we've all been addicted to for years now because, like I said before, it's easy to just pick your phone up and listen to whatever you want to. You've got all the music from the world at your fingertips. So it's time to look at the bigger picture and to move away from that and go back to a more physical form of music, something that actually benefits the musicians, the people that are actually making the art that you love. Because yes, even though the larger musicians are doing just fine with the money they make from streaming, most bands are not. Most bands are making less than poverty wages off of streaming services. And that's why they end up having to tour year-round and charge exorbitant prices for tickets. I think there's a lot to this topic to unpack, so let me know what you guys think. Like always, if you enjoyed the episode, make sure you give me a thumbs up. Hit that subscribe button down below. That's all I got. Until next time, keep on spinning. Peace.